I made a couple maps for the national map, which was fun. First, I just want to give a little credit where credit is due. Without these people, this map wouldn't be as good as it is, and any faults in it are my own, unless it's a problem with the data. So there you go. Okay. So what is the national map? If you're not familiar with it, it is a geoportal, which is a source for official, authoritative topographic, geographic data for the United States and sometimes North America. It is a website, it's a data repository, it's also a map with a bunch of services you can overlay. These services can be consumed by other applications, and our base maps can also be consumed by those applications as well. I think we offer REST and WMS formats, but those are words I don't really know, so don't ask me about that. So let's show a little before and after, because that's the fun stuff. Some of you might remember this is sort of what the old topo map on the national map looked like up until a few months ago. I resurrected this from an ancient MXD, so it's not quite the same, but it's a little bit awful. So this is what I came up with in a couple of months. Ooh. Ah, nice. Yes. This is the coast of Maine. There's the old version, and here's the new. And if it looks bad, also don't blame me, blame the projector, right? Right, okay. Here's Washington, D.C. Here's the old version. That is supposed to be 1 to 9,000, not 9 million. And here's the new version. And my favorite place, the Front Range of Colorado. Here's old, and here's new. I actually do prefer that shaded relief in the old one. We redid it this year, and it's actually going to be my job to redo it again next year so that we get a little bit more contrast. Okay, and here's the Imagery topo. Imagery topo is kind of our version of Google's satellite. We have a little bit of topographic information overlaid. We use NASA blue marble for small scales and NAPE aerial photography for large scales. So here's the old version. Just a caveat, I actually haven't published my version yet. I was a little ambitious with my abstract, so you're still going to see this if you look at our Imagery topo base map, but I promise I'm going to make those changes sometime this calendar year. So again, old, new. Ooh. Old, Daniel Huffman's favorite place. Sorry, that's actually not Madison, because I don't like you that much. It's old. And the new. And I did design this on purpose so that that topo information would fade. It's not supposed to be prominent. And here's Seattle. Here's the old with these lovely red roads. And here's the new. So, and I invite you guys to sort of feel free to pan around. I'll give you the URL at the end. If you have any comments or suggestions, I'm constantly refining this design because we're going to republish this again at the end of next year. So, sorry, end of next fiscal year. That's like April, May, June, whatever. Okay, so how do I get from the old to the new? I had to fix a huge number of problems. So things like this. These are some of the definition queries on the layers that we used in ArcMap. And it was a little bit crazy. So instead of kind of extracting these and making our own data layers, I saw a whole bunch of this stuff, and it actually caused our server to crash constantly while trying to cache. These are all raster caches. We're not yet to vector tiles, so we rely a lot on, well, raster caching. It takes 9 months. It used to take 9 months to cache our maps, so now it's down to 1 month, but stuff like this is crazy. So I'm the only one doing cartographic design for the national map, so I decided to just start doing stuff and you know, get shit for it later, which is fine. So I decided to change the philosophy of this map. I wanted to go from a reference map, which has everything on it, to a base map where you can put your own data on top and our data on top. And to do that, I had to totally revise our MXD from the ground up and refine the data sources, some of which were old and a little odd, didn't know where they came from. I had to create a whole bunch of data to get away from those crazy definition queries, and using better filters when I didn't feel like making whole new feature classes. And my favorite part, changing the symbols and the labels, of course. So just an example of some of the weird data stuff that I have to deal with. This is at 1 to 9 million scale. I'm using our 10 million scale road data set for North America. This set has kind of a hierarchy, a functional road classification. And at this scale, if I showed all of the roads, it would actually be too much data. So I filtered out just controlled access highways, which is interstates and some US routes. And it's kind of there, but you see a whole bunch of gaps where the road network drops out and spurs. So it's not ideal, and you'll actually see this in a bunch of other national level maps too, where we just don't have good data with good classification. As we go into 4 million scale, now I'm switching over to our 1 million scale road database, or data set, and this is a different functional road classification. Now it's just shield type, so interstates versus US routes. So again, we're getting weird dangles that aren't really fixable in a short period of time. But as we go in, then I can add a level of data that's appropriate. So this is interstates and US routes. And finally, at 1 to 1 million scale, I can have them all on and have a complete road network. So custom data layers. We didn't have names of the major Hawaiian islands or the US Virgin Islands, which is a little bit crazy because if you want to look at Hawaii, you probably want to see the names of those big islands. So I just extracted this data from our islands feature class so that I could pull them out, make them big, and make them persist. Because you don't want to see all of the island names for all those little tiny whoa. Sorry, this is a touchy little cable. John? There we go. I blame John. Okay. So that's the theme here, right? If it's not my fault. It's definitely something else. So I also had to make ocean polygons, because that looks a little ugly on the left-hand side, doesn't it? The Puerto Rico polygons I don't think made it into this cache, but they will be in the next cache. This was awful. So our Hydra Network on the left, 1 to 10 million scale, it's for all of North America. There is no attribution that lends itself to an easy hierarchical filtering. So I actually did this by hand. It was awful. I had to go through and select all the rivers, and some of these are actually polygons in this data set because they're coastlines of reservoirs or rivers, and there's no artificial paths in this hydrography data set. So I'm never doing that again. But that's where we are right now. I had to do something similar for roads as well. I had to filter out using some fun GIS magic to get an appropriate road network for super small scale. Okay, removing data, which was most of what I did. Here's the old version at 1 to 36 million. Here's the new one. I took out a whole bunch of stuff and added some things, but mostly it was about removing data. I also took out elementary and middle schools because seriously, you just don't need that in a base map. You can add it. You don't, come on, You can add it in our overlays, but there's no need to have them all on there, and there's so many of them. And I also took out federal lands and federal land polygons, except for large national park labels. So we kept I added the labels in to sort of give a little context at small scales of where major important land areas were, but all of this other stuff, most of these tiny little national forests, they're gone. You have to turn on an overlay to see where they are. I added some data because I felt that if you're in Washington, D.C., I think you should see that there's a White House and a U.S. Capitol there. We don't currently have a way to show all of the important national landmarks or national monuments or things like that. I just did this by hand. I pulled them out of our data set. But it's my job also next year to come up with a way to pull out important geographic names or building names. That's going to be a fun project. Here's the old version. We were relying on these polygons of federal land outlines, which I don't really like. Number one, I don't like the design, but you can see the label is a little wonky. And we don't even have a US Capitol, just Capitol Hill. So that's why I made that change. I also added National Scenic Trails. This is just a filter on our trail database by does it have the name National Scenic Trail in it or not? And Census urban areas so that you can see where there are populated places. Simple, right? I also added major mountain peaks at small scales, filtered by elevation. Ooh, the fun stuff. So This is a very small change, but you have to have a meeting about every change you propose in the government. So I actually got this one accepted, and that was easy. So I changed state capitals to a square in the center instead of a star at scales where we show all of them together, where you can see both DC and Annapolis and Dover. At large scales, we use the US Topo standard, which is the yellow circle with a star. But I felt that at smaller scales and medium scales, it was important to have that distinction. I desaturated the color palette a little bit. The census area here, the urban area, might actually appear bright, but that's because our shaded relief tends to change colors between scales. So it was either very bright or not visible at all. And this is also an example of some of the typography changes, which I'll be talking about, which is my favorite thing, as you guys know. And if you don't, now you do. So I changed the serif typeface from Georgia to Sitka, which is another Microsoft font designed by Matthew Carter, who is a font genius. I've met him once. I know, that's my claim to fame. And I changed the sans serif from Trebuchet to Seago UI. And I did this because Georgia and Trebuchet serve their purpose on the US topo maps, where you are looking at large-scale areas and you can fit those labels in, but they're really big characters. They're also a little bit whimsical, so that's why I made that change. I felt it was more appropriate for a national map to have something a little subtler and smaller. I also made most of the labels sans serif because I don't like serifs that much, so that's my choice. And I changed those 2-point white halos, which are awful, to very skinny gray halos that are meant to blend into the shaded relief. So you can kind of bring the labels out of the background, but you're not seeing the halos as a thing. And fewer labels overall, of course. So here's an example in Grand Canyon. That national park label is bigger, it's brown. Every label was black in the old version, which it's a bit much. Black on white is very high contrast, and it tends to vibrate a little bit to the eye. So I changed a lot of that. Most of the labels are not black. They're dark gray or brown. And then the Colorado River label has a blue halo now, blue halos for hydro areas instead of that white halo. And all those geographic features are gone. Here's another example in Alaska, again, taking out all of those polygons for national forests, national parks, and changing that ice mass symbol, which I don't know if you can tell, but it's kind of bad. So I changed it, and people liked it, so great. It wouldn't be NACES without a little Prince, so I know, what's the controversy on a national map, right? Can you believe it? Museums and libraries from our geographic names database. I totally made this executive decision because in our current US topo maps, the only structures we show are hospitals and fire stations and law enforcement places, prisons, police stations, what have you. And that kind of gives a very authoritarian character to our maps, and I don't like that because yes, we're the government, but no, it's not always about authoritarian structures and that presence of authority. The government also sponsors cultural institutions as well. So I made that change on purpose, and then after it was cached and published, I was then informed that we don't maintain these, and some of these are private institutions. Sorry, but they're there now, haha, so too bad. So, moving forward, what's next? Well, I learned a few lessons, so we're going to put that practical into Practical Cartography Day, not just a show and tell. This is way harder than it seems. To design a national map when you have no guidelines and almost no best practices, and to control symbols and labels for a vast area with wildly different physiographic characteristics is really difficult. And wrangling data is very tough if you don't have good data management, which I'm going to tell you, don't really have good data management for a lot of the data at the national level. We do for our US Topo 24K map series, but it's kind of a little Wild West with what I was dealing with for the national map. It's also important if you're doing anything, of course, everybody knows this, get somebody else to look at your work because I didn't see any of my mistakes. And the ones that are there, like I said, I'll be fixing. next year. It's the motto of government, okay. And of course, improving the cartography does reveal all the flaws in the data, unfortunately. So one of the things I'll be doing next year is working extensively on that behind-the-scenes data management, rather than just the design up front. So as part of that, I really want to push for getting better data in our territories. I think it is totally shameful that we don't have really good cartography in all parts of the United States, whatever that may be, if it's a state or a territory or a protectorate. I think that's just absolutely crucial, because if we're not going to do it, who else will? We're the national map. So I'm trying to work on that. I also, as I said, I have to fix the shaded relief, which is going to be fun. Coastlines are also tough. Don't look at Louisiana. So part of that is because when I have to go from scale to scale, I have to mix up our data sources a little bit to control for the right level of detail and data that maybe doesn't have an easily filterable attribute for a hierarchy. Maybe I can't show that, so I have to use something from a different level of detail at a certain scale. So sometimes things don't match up, especially on coastlines. So that's a big thing to fix next year. I'm going to tweak the colors even more. They told me not to change too much, so I tried. I tried to honor the US topo palette. And we are working on making vector tile versions of these maps. That is slow going, but I think it's going to happen. As of now, though, we are strictly a raster cache outfit. So this is a design that I'm working on. It's definitely in progress, and this is my version of a purple, blue, green palette. I'm trying to get a little bit closer to Section 508 compatibility and to get away from that heavy redness you see in the current design. The roads are red, even the hydrography has a little red in that blue, and I'll show you a comparison. So here's another view. This is around Salt Lake City of this new design. And here's that color comparison. If you look in the lower right, you can really see the difference in the blues and just how much red there is in the current design. So to sum up, hopefully I haven't gone over my 15 minutes. This is where we were, technically where we still are with the Imagery topo base map. Look at those halos. I know, right? Oh my gosh. So here's where we are, and hopefully we'll be at the end of this year. No more of those ugly halos. Okay. Even the director of my office within the USGS commented on those halos, so this is a very important development in the history of National Map. And hopefully this is where we'll be going. And even if we don't replace our current design with something like this, it might be an additional base map that we offer. So all still under construction, of course. The end.